All right, room 205. We are on chapter 3 of Harry Potter and the Chamber of Secrets. Ron, breathed Harry, creeping to the window and pushing it up so they could talk through the bars. Ron, how did you? What the? Harry's mouth fell open as the full impact of what he was seeing hit him. Ron was leaning out the back window of an old turquoise car, which was parked in mid-air. Grinning at Harry from the front seats were Fred and George, Ron's elder twin brothers. "All right, Harry?" "What's been going on?" said Ron. "Why haven't you been answering my letters? I've asked you to stay about 12 times, and then Dad came home and said you'd got an official warning for using magic in front of muggles." "It wasn't me." "And how did he know?" "He works for the ministry," said Ron. "You know we're not supposed to do spells outside of school." "A bit rich coming from you," said Harry, staring at the floating car. "Oh, this doesn't count," said Ron. "We're only borrowing this. It's Dad. We didn't enchant it. But doing magic in front of those muggles you live with—" "I told you I didn't. But it'll take too long to explain now. Look, can you explain to them at Hogwarts that the Dursleys have locked me up and won't let me come back? And obviously I can't magic myself out, because the Ministry will think that's the second spell I've done in 3 days, so—" "Stop gibbering," said Ron. "We've come to take you home with us." "But you can't magic me out either." "We don't need to," said Ron, jerking his head toward the front seats and grinning. "You forgot who I've got with me." "Tie that round the bars," said Fred, throwing the end of a rope to Harry. "If the Dursleys wake up, I'm in trouble," said Harry, as he tied the rope tightly around a bar, and Fred revved up the car. "Don't worry," said Fred, "and stand back." Harry moved back into the shadows next to Hedwig, who seemed to have realized how important this was and kept still and silent. The car revved louder and louder, and suddenly, with a crunching noise, the bars were pulled clean out of the window as Fred drove straight up into the air. Harry ran back to the window to see the bars dangling a few feet above the ground. Panting, Ron hoisted them up into the car, and Harry listened anxiously, but there was no sound from the Dursleys' bedroom. When the bars were safely in the back seat with Ron, Fred reversed as closely as possible to Harry's window. "Get in," Ron said. "But all my Hogwarts stuff, my wand, my broomstick, well, where is it?" "Locked in the cupboard under the stairs, and I can't get out of this room." "No problem," said George from the front passenger seat. "Out of the way, Harry." Fred and George climbed carefully through the window into Harry's room. You had to hand it to them, thought Harry, as George took an ordinary hairpin from his pocket and started to pick the lock. "A lot of wizards think it's a waste of time knowing this sort of muggle trick," said Fred, "but we feel their skills worth learning, even if it is a bit slow." There was a small click, and the door swung open. "So we'll get your trunk. You grab anything you need from your room and hand it out to Ron," whispered George. "Watch out for the bottom stair. It creaks," Harry whispered back as the twins disappeared into the dark landing. Harry dashed around his room, collecting his things together and passing them out of the window to Ron. Then he went up to help Fred and George heave his trunk up the stairs. Harry heard Uncle Vernon cough. At last, panting, they reached the landing, then carried the trunk through Harry's room to the open window. Fred climbed back into the car to pull with Ron, and Harry and George pushed from the bedroom side. Inch by inch, the trunk slid through the window. Uncle Vernon coughed again. "A bit more," panted Fred, who was pulling from the inside car. "One good push." Harry and George threw their shoulders against the trunk, and it slid out the window into the back seat of the car. "Okay, let's go," George whispered. But as Harry climbed into the windowsill, there came a sudden loud screech from behind him, followed immediately by the thunder of Uncle Vernon's voice. "That ruddy owl! I've forgotten Hedwig!" Harry tore back across the room as the landing light clicked on. He snatched up Hedwig's cage, dashed to the window, and passed it out to Ron. He was scrambling back onto the chest of drawers when Uncle Vernon hammered on the unlocked door, and it crashed open. For a split second, Uncle Vernon stood framed in the doorway. Then he let out a bellow like an angry bull and dived at Harry, grabbing him by the ankle. Ron, Fred, and George seized Harry's arms and pulled as hard as they could. "Petunia!" roared Uncle Vernon. "He's getting away! He's getting away!" The Weasleys have a gigantic tug, and Harry's leg slid out of Uncle Vernon's grasp. As soon as Harry was in the car and had slammed the door shut, Ron yelled, "Put your foot down, Fred!" And the car shot suddenly towards the moon. Harry couldn't believe it. He was free. He wound down the window, the night air whipping his hair, and looking back at the shrinking rooftops of Privet Drive. Uncle Vernon, Aunt Petunia, and Dudley were all hanging, dumbstruck, out of the Harry's window. "See you next summer," Harry yelled. The Weasleys roared with laughter, and Harry settled back in his seat, grinning from ear to ear. "Let Hedwig out," he told Ron. "She can fly behind us. She hasn't had a chance to stretch her wings for ages." George handed the hairpin to Ron, and a moment later, Hedwig had soared joyfully out of the window to glide alongside them like a ghost. "So, what's the story, Harry?" said Ron impatiently. "What's been happening?" Harry told them all about Dobby, the warning he'd given Harry, and the fiasco of the violet pudding. There was a long, shocked silence when he finished. "Very fishy," said Fred finally. "Definitely dodgy," agreed George. "So he wouldn't even tell you who's supposed to be plotting all this stuff?" "I don't think he could," said Harry. "I told you, every time he got close to letting something slip, he started banging his head against the wall." He saw Fred and George look at each other. "What, do you think he was lying to me?" said Harry. "Well," said Fred, "put it this way. House elves have got powerful magic of their own, but they can't usually use it without their master's permission. I think Dobby was sent to stop you coming back to Hogwarts. Someone's idea of a joke. Can you think of anyone at school with a grudge against you?" "Yes," said Harry and Ron together, instantly. "Draco Malfoy," Harry explained. "He doesn't like me." "Draco Malfoy?" said George, turning around. "Not Lucius Malfoy's son?" "Must be. It's not a very common name, is it?" said Harry. "Why?" "I've heard Dad talking about him," said George. "He was a big supporter of you-know-who." "And when you-know-who disappeared," said Fred, craning around to look at Harry, "Lucius Malfoy came back saying he'd never met any of it. Load of dung. Dad reckons he was right in you-know-who's inner circle." Harry had heard these rumors about Malfoy's family before, and they didn't surprise him at all. Draco Malfoy made Dudley Dursley look like a kind, thoughtful, and sensitive boy. "I don't know whether the Malfoys own a house elf," said Harry. "Well, whoever owns him will be an old wizarding family, and they'll be rich," said Fred. "Yeah, Mom's always wishing we had a house elf to do the ironing," said George. "But all we've got is this lousy old ghoul in the attic and gnomes all over the garden. House elves come with big old manors and castles and places like that. You won't catch one in our house." Harry was silent. Judging by the fact that Draco Malfoy usually had the best of everything, his family was rolling in wizard gold. He could just see Malfoy strutting around a large manor house. Sending the family servant to stop Harry going back to Hogwarts also sounded exactly like the sort of thing Malfoy would do. Had Harry been silly to take Dobby seriously? "I'm glad we came to get you anyway," said Ron. "I was getting really worried when you didn't answer any of my letters. I thought it was Errol's fault at first." "Who's Errol?" "Our owl. He's ancient. He's so old. It wouldn't be the first time he'd collapsed on delivery. So when I tried to borrow Hermes—" "Who?" "The owl Mom and Dad bought Percy when he was made a prefect," said Fred from the front. "But Percy wouldn't lend him to me," said Ron. "Said he needed him." "Percy's been acting very oddly this summer," said George, frowning. "And he has been sending a lot of letters and spending a lot of time up in his room. I mean, there's only so many times you can polish a prefect badge. You're driving too far west, Fred," he added, pointing at the compass in the dashboard. Fred twiddled the steering wheel. "So, does your dad know you've got the car?" said Harry, guessing the answer. "No," said Ron. All right, we're going to stop there, and I will finish chapter 3 on Friday. All right. Bye, guys.